Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property and the world of property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday from 10 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, please leave us a Google review. If you're watching via social media, then get involved in the conversation in the comments section below wherever you're watching us. Our email address for any suggested discussion topics is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you don't have time to watch the whole show live with us on a Sunday morning, then all you can have to do is to get the podcast, which is available from wherever you get your podcasts from, over on the far side of the screen. And we're live on Dilsey Radio every week as well. So let's take a look at this week's property news with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Yes, good morning, Paul. Good morning to all our viewers and listeners, wherever you are. Property is the hot subject at the moment, coming up to election time, and they're throwing all their sort of toys out to see what it brings for us.
Yeah, we're just over a week away, of course, from the budget, which is going to be talked about yet again this week as to what we may or may not get in terms of property. So let's just take a look at our first story. This is quite an interesting one. Aging first-time buyers, are they blurring mainstream or later life mortgage lines? Well, this is a story this week in Mortgage Solutions. And what they're saying is that most people, if you ask them today, bought their first property when they were in their 20s or even early 30s. Yet the average age of a first-time buyer has been going up for some time. It's now into the mid-30s, and they reckon that now people are even getting in their first property as a first-time buyer in their 40s and even 50s, would you believe? The number of first-time buyers in their 20s is in decline, while the number aged over 40 continues to increase, and perhaps somewhat shockingly, the number of those who are over 50 has increased by 30% in the last 5 years. And of course, that leaves a large cohort of people who no doubt feel the chances of them ever getting on the ladder are slim to none. Never mind having a first mortgage at any age, which traditionally many people will be paying theirs off. So there are now people, of course, Joe, who are coming in their early 50s, would you believe, as a first-time buyer, when most of us are thinking about getting rid of our mortgage. What a change.
Well, yes. I mean, it's not a surprising change, but it is a dramatic change as time has gone on. Primarily because of the affordability factor, and also about employment and the gap between being able to borrow the amount. And I think the biggest issue, Paul, has always been about the deposit. Really, deposit and stamp duty are two costs that are really a big burden on buyers. First of all, they've got to find a substantial amount of deposit, and obviously the whole life cycle has changed. There was a time, I go back, wind the tape back 40 odd years, people used to be able to buy together, even if they were just partners. Their joint income, etc., was something that gave them a good base. The prices of property were probably a little bit more achievable, a bit more affordable. Then came, and this is really where it actually, I believe, went wrong. It went wrong when the buy-to-let market came in. And again, the burden falls back on any of the governments that they did. They thought, well, actually, we'll make life difficult for any other ways of earning money. So it was difficult for them to have long-term deposits, which maybe give them an income. So people that had money or were looking to retire started to buy in a buy-to-let program in order to be able to say, okay, well, look, that's going to be my pension, that's going to be my fallback. And they became the competitor to the first-time buyer. So it was between a buyer who's going to buy as a first-time buyer or a buyer who's going to buy as an investment. Well, the investing buyers obviously had deposits, had that money because they already had perhaps another property. They may have released money from that property in maybe a remortgage, and then thought, right, I can actually now afford to buy another property. And subsequently, those properties increased in value. So that's where the real disparity, in my opinion, came along, is when the option of the first-time buyers was just changed to first-time buyers and investors. Of course, now we're at the other side, aren't we? The investors are no longer interested in being the investors. In the meantime, that bubble has been blown up to a proportion where first-time buyers are finding it hard to find the amount of deposit that they need, and of course the affordability that is happening. Hence the time, i.e. the person who's buying in their 20s, 30s is now actually buying in their perhaps 40s and 50s.
And of course, that's blurring the lines for the mortgage companies because effectively, these first-time buyers are almost in the later life lending category, whereby they will be looking for equity release from the property that they own. And I guess that's really surely if you're in your 50s and getting your first-time buyer's mortgage, you don't really take that on with a view to actually ever completing that, I wouldn't have thought, because unless, of course, you're able to take a 20-year term, and even then you might still have finished work by the end of that, but that's going to mean your repayments are going to be very much higher than they would be if you took a 30 or even a 35-year term. So presumably they're thinking, well, it's just cheaper than renting, so I'll get a mortgage, and then there'll be equity hopefully in the property by then, and I'll just sell and take what profit I make.
Yeah, Hobson's choice, really, isn't it? I mean, it's no, there isn't much of a choice for them. Either they carry on renting, and obviously rents are now exorbitant. Again, the same principle applies because it's a supply and demand factor. The demand is high in the rental side. The supply is now limited because a lot of the so-called investors are now sort of jumping ship and thinking, well, actually, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not fun. And so they're having to pay more because there's lesser supply of investment people who have got properties that they want to let. So then the first time buyer says, well, actually, it's actually probably cheaper for me to buy because the rent's there. I mean, recently I was speaking to somebody who took the steps of taking on a first time shared ownership scheme, which clearly pointed out that the rental and the mortgage value actually equated to less than half of what they would have probably paid for the same as a rental property. So assuming it's a one bedroom property and they were renting it out at £1,400 a month, they were actually now paying, inclusive of the rent share to the people and their mortgage, probably about £700 a month. So of course they literally halved the amount. So there's no problem in and at any time that somebody should go and buy, because I think that is obviously the way to go. But the reality of it is that people don't have the huge issue. Now, obviously, there'll be a level of discrimination to say, well, actually, at the age of 50, I take a 25-year mortgage, and I'll be 75 by the time I end up paying that. Actually, I retire earlier. So what happens? The lenders will start to say, well, actually, you're not in a position to take a 25-year mortgage. You might have to take a 15 or 20-year mortgage, and then their payments are up. So really in a quandary in that sense. But there are mortgage companies now beginning to look at longer terms, perhaps 35 years and so forth, or in some cases equity release type of operations where they give 100% mortgage over a period of age. So there are lots and lots of areas that are being discussed, but certainly it's now a very challenging time for the first-time buyers.
Yes, because some of these older first-time buyers could be on a fixed pension for part of their mortgage period. So one would think that, I suppose this phrase mortgage for life that we hear about now, whereby maybe when you take it out, you've got a low start in terms of the repayments, and then perhaps that balloons in the middle where you pay back some of the discount, if you like, that you had at the beginning, and then it eases off towards the end when your income is going to be reducing, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, those are ideals, but unfortunately, the calculating way the calculations are done by the mortgage lenders is not always pragmatic like we would think about it. They have their own, and they've got to earn their money and on their interest, so they will make it not as easy as we'd like it to be, but perhaps should I say challenging is probably the right word, in order to make sure that they are trying to do the best they can for the first-time buyers. But that whole area of first-time buyers has now changed. And I think that has been down to the fact that there was this two-horse race as opposed to a one-horse race. And there was investors that at the same time as first-time buyers.
I guess the whole sort of hybrid approach of part interest only or lifetime mortgage. So, maybe the fact that they just actually pay the interest only and live in that, and therefore there's a much lower monthly cost, which they could afford, be cheaper than renting. But actually then the property just goes back to the bank at the end, and everybody gets what they take out of it.
Yeah. I mean, the two people that will always get paid, as we already know, is the bank and the tax man. They're all, we may spend our life trying to avoid paying either, But when it comes to the end, they do have their hand out. They have a charge on the property, and they'll claim their death duties and inheritance taxes and all the other taxes that are there. So you can spend your life trying to avoid them, but ultimately they will get it. So, and whatever's left is going to be left to the families that are there. So yeah, I mean, I think the reality of the subject is that times have changed so much that first-time buyers are now at 40 to 50, or 35, 40, 50, that sort of age, primarily because of affordability and primarily because of the property values. And the two things that they've got to always consider in their spend is stamp duty and, of course, deposit. Now, deposit-wise, you can have 95%. You have Help to Buy mortgages. There's all sorts of other packages out there, and of course, our resident mortgage advisor Bob Singh will probably throw his tuppence worth of what products that are out there and so forth. But from my point of view, those are the two things. And of course, the biggest thing is the stamp duty. Now, it's okay if they're buying less than £250,000. But if they are buying and they're looking to buy more than a one-bedroom flat and they're looking into a 2 or 3 bedroom and they go over that, then of course there is a chunk of stamp duty money that they've also got to find too.
Yeah, I mean, even if they do just do, for example, interest only, and then they get to a point where the repayments are not going to be possible because they're on a fixed income or pension or something, then if the property goes back to the bank, what are they going to do then? They're going to have to rent again. So the problem just has been postponed, hasn't it, to some extent?
Yeah, it's always just been pushed to the side. But the reality of it is that if they can, whether it's through shared ownership or through first-time buyers or collectively, I mean, you have to bear in mind that there are up to, I think, certainly 4 people that can be on a mortgage application, and that's how life really started. It started before buy-to-let came into process. People would group together as a family and get onto the property ladder, and of course. Times have become a bit more different, challenging, and more selfish, where people are saying, well, actually, I don't want to be part of a group. I just want to do it all by myself. And if you want to do it all by yourself, then, of course, you've got to find a bigger deposit and have an income that's going to support that. I noticed this. I think somebody's made a comment about Paul. I'm not sure who that is.
Yeah, I think I can't see anything. I can't see the name. But I think... what I was going to say was that the suggestion here by Patrick Bamford, who wrote the piece, is the fact that there needs to be a more holistic approach to because a lot of these people probably won't have a particularly good pension, so therefore they might even struggle to raise a decent fixed income to continue paying those payments. So the suggestion that financial advisors respond in terms of making some kind of commitment to having some kind of pension which has a mortgage wrapped into it. So basically there's a sort of financial protection throughout the entirety of one's working life.
Yeah, so the pensions are, there have been, people are now sort of looking at and relying on it, but throughout the last 20, 25 years, the pension schemes have not been particularly rewarding for the ordinary folk. They might have been okay for the chief executives of many. And when you see somebody is leaving a company after a couple of weeks, they, even like, a month-old prime minister has ended up with a hell of a salary and a pension scheme for just stepping up and messing up everyone's life. But the reality is that, they haven't been as good for the individuals. And there have been no other vehicles, no other routes for people to be protective. I mean, the only other possibility is if some sort of life insurance. But when times are difficult, which they have been and they still are, the things that go first are things like your life insurance, your endowments, and so forth, because they're a luxury product. And if you can afford not to pay, or not so much afford, but if you just feel that I'm not going to pay another £250 a month towards a life insurance that may be no benefit to me, but it's going to be beneficial to my family when I go. Right now, the pain is here for me, and so people will say, "Well, that's just got to go," and that's what happens. So those products don't have it, and neither the government or the financial institutions have come up with no alternative for people to give them comfort in investing and so forth. I mean, right now, the good thing about the people that are saving is the interest rates went up. So, for the first time, they're actually enjoying a good return on their deposit sitting in their bank account. But equally, as you know, this week, the banks have enjoyed a tremendous amount of benefit out of that too. So, they're not passing anything on to other people. And that will continue until such time as some sort of product is brought in to keep those people investing and interested in the financial market. Financial markets are so volatile, you have to be on it all the time. And that's part of the reason people actually end up with property, because at least they know, even though there's a mortgage on it, they can touch it and feel it and see it and put a key through the front door and say, well, look, at least I've got this. Even though I've got a mortgage on it, I've got some sort of control on it. Whereas when they're looking at some products, they've got no particular control on it, and the control is done through the financial. At your risk, we might chuck in XYZ, but then tomorrow you might not have a single penny. So that doesn't, inspire people to think, well, actually, I'll take that road, because that's a good gamble. They take the gamble with something like property, even if it's a small property somewhere in the Outer Hebrides. They still think, well, actually, I've got something that may be worth another £10,000, maybe.
Well, we're continuing to focus on later life property and lending, if you like, because as we approach the March the 6th budget announcement, it's inevitable we'll hear more from what Jeremy Hunt should or should not be doing. And obviously on the 6th, we will find out exactly what he is going to be doing. But part of the pre-budget inevitability is a continued focus on stamp duty, of course. Over the last few weeks, this is a piece by Stuart Wilson, who's the chairman of Air Club. He says, I've read articles suggesting further holidays for first-time buyers, increasing of the thresholds in order to take people out of the tax when purchasing, plus calls to scrap stamp duty altogether. A further suggestion, and one that has been notable in recent years, comes in the form of whether stamp duty for those wishing to downsize property is still viable. Also, it has been asked whether the government should instead exempt downsizers to allow them to move to smaller properties and free up the larger homes that are hard to come by for those seeking to move up the ladder, particularly, of course, families. But it's interesting to see that a recent report commissioned by the Family Building Society and sponsored by Lords Mandelson and Heseltine urged policymakers to look at this option. It suggested there were considerable numbers of older homeowners who wanted to downsize but were put off by the large costs involved, particularly the stamp duty, of course, on the purchase. I've no doubt, he says, that some individuals in this situation would ideally like to move out of larger properties and perhaps being put off by the sums of money involved. Not, of course, just the stamp duty. This could well be seen as wasted money, but also in terms of moving and the estate agency costs and everything else that comes with it. But most people, of course, do tend to downsize to things like bungalows. But interestingly, bungalows, of course, are now becoming a rarity because so many of them are getting developed. So they're being bought by developers, not people who are retiring and need to live on a single floor due to health issues potentially, but they're being bought by developers. And of course, they're taking the large piece of land that they usually historically come on and then building up on the stories and, of course, turning them all into flats. So we're losing the properties that those sort of people will want to buy, which is just as bad as the stamp duty cost. Are you there, Joe?
Yes, I mean, yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the answer to that question, the bungalow thing has always been on a bit of a losing wicket because it's a small market and a coastal market. People tend to go to the coast looking for bungalows, etc. And they've never been an attractive property. So yes, developers look at them and see, well, they can actually add another floor and change that environment. It's either a row of bungalows and then you've got somebody who's stuck a chalet on it, or they've stuck another story on it, and that becomes a family home. And the largest attraction for bungalows is that they've got space. They've got normally reasonable gardens, plenty of iron garden to the front and perhaps even to the back. So they were set out with good plots. They weren't actually tiny little bungalows with tiny little gardens, which actually, if you think about it, should be the case, because most people that want to go into bungalows don't probably want to do a lot of gardening. But anyway, they were designed in such a way that that's exactly what they did. So yes, there are people now buying them, but they're not building them again. Primarily, again, there's not many people that want to go to the bungalows. Also, there's a psyche in this, isn't there? Those that want to go to bungalows or feel they need to go to bungalows, they feel that they've aged and they don't particularly want to be seen in a bungalow because that's what it it becomes, oh, you're old and therefore you've got to go to that. But so new schemes have come up, where they've had people like builders like McCarthy and Stone who have built homes where they have all of the facilities in house, and therefore they create a new community for people of 60 plus. So there are changes that come into that side. Now with the bungalow situation, much a plot value, and it offers the scheme. The argument about downsizing and stamp duty, to be perfectly honest with you, I've over the years been to many people that probably should have downsized ages ago. They can't manage the property. They can't even get up the stairs. In some cases, some people haven't even been upstairs in their home for some time because they managed to create everything downstairs. But again, it's a bit of a mindset. Mindset is that I don't particularly want to lose this lovely house that I've spent most of my life building, creating, and putting all that effort and energy into my garden that has now got hundreds and thousands of pounds worth of plants, time, energy, and so much put in. I don't want to do that because a builder's going to come along and just bulldoze it away, and I'm not going to see the benefits. So there's a psychological, emotional buy into that. And no matter how much stamp duty they reduce, you're not going to get these people to shift out of that. So that part, and also they're probably at that other end of the spectrum where they are quite expensive properties, and so the handful of people that are going to look at them, so if you had 100 people, you might find 4 or 5 that look at that, as opposed to the 3-bed semi, the modern terrace, modern development, and modern estate that's being built up, where people, first-time buyers, young families, are going to be probably 40 or 50% of the people that are going to look at that. So that's why they want to take them down and put more on. I think the demand is much, much higher for family homes, i.e. houses. And the idea of flats is really not a good family situation, because the children don't have a chance to go out and play in the garden and so forth, even though most of them spend most of their life on an iPad sitting in front of the telly anyway. But the point is that they don't have that choice, that sort of scenario in a block of flats. So there is a demand for terraced houses or houses with a garden. And so people have to move further afield, and that doesn't happen in the cities. That's the space. We had Race for Space, which was the big thing, wasn't it? To go out and have that space. I think in this case we've got to reverse it. And we haven't got the race for space. We've got the race for probably no space in this case, because all the people want to get back into the cities and go back to work and want to commute.
It's very interesting because they say that research at the end of last year from Quick Move Properties revealed that just 1.2% of all new build completions were bungalows. Now, this kind of home accounts for only 7.6% of the UK's entire housing stock. In other words, the number of bungalows has been shrinking, because why would a new build developer with a finite amount of land build a property that takes more of that footprint when they can use less land and build 2 or 3-storey homes on it? It's a question of economics, therefore not just bungalows, but the wider supply of properties available to those wishing to downsize has shrunk, and of course the price of property has continued to rise, making it more difficult to move, certainly to provide to properties that fulfill the needs of the average downsizer. And that is the problem, isn't it? Because if they don't build anything for older people to move into, where are they going to go?
Well, this is what they're happening. As I said, there are communities being built, which are probably, in all honesty, a right thing to do. It's just that, again, it's that psyche of mindset. I don't want to live with other people. Though, this week alone, I went to a site in Southend-on-Sea, of all places. I've travelled the UK, to be honest with you, this week, and so there you have apartments within a complex that actually were quite endearing and quite important. Each property has its own front door, so they live independently, but at the same time they are part of a community where they have people available on site to assist in every shape or form, medically and sort of support and anything that they need to go to. And I think that's probably where the communities are going. But someone who's downsizing from a £1 million property, for example, that had all the space and all the freedom and all the things, doesn't want to be cooped up into a small 1-bedroom flat in a community.
Exactly. Yeah.
They don't want to be part of that community, and they won't downsize. And will they downsize to a bungalow? The answer is they probably won't even downsize to a bungalow. It's a huge barrier in their mind of thinking, well, I'm not going to go there. I'm not old. I'm not going to go there. I don't want to do that. But I know, and I'm sure other agents and auctioneers will say that you go to a property and sometimes they've never been to, probably 3/4 of the house. They've never actually been in it, let alone paying someone to come and clean it and keep up to it. It's just, they just can't even move around that. So, but it is a mindset, and it's a hard one to get down. So even if they drop the stamp duty for them, I'm not sure, in my experience, that would be a motivator for them. I think it's a dream, it's a wish on the wish list of saying, well, let's drop the stamp duty and these people will downsize. I think that they will never downsize. I've been to more homes than I probably have hot dinners, and I can see them. They're just not willing to move out of what they have spent their life building. They'd rather go out in a small box and know it's done and dusted than actually go to live in a box.
And I think you're probably right on that fact. But the other thing, of course, is that they're often tied with these sort of McCarthy and Stone type places. They're often tied into some kind of lease contract where they've got to pay for all the services and the maintenance of the building. So they won't have that on a proper freehold. And
Well,
just
yes,
because you can't get up and down the stairs doesn't mean to say you need to go into warden assisted.
there is. That's an interesting point, and there is an argument with that. And the argument is that whilst you do need those services, and those services are available, and you do pay for them indirectly, you pay for them anyway. You just don't realise them. So you might live in a big house, you might have bigger rates all by yourself, you might have all that electricity to pay for the house, you'll have all those costs which you actually will reduce. But then if you wanted assistance and you wanted someone to hire to come and clean your house and look after you medically and support you, so everyone's going to get paid somewhere. So the concept of the McCarthy, I'm not advocating that it's a good concept, but if you look at it from a numbers point of view, it actually works better because at least they're in a cleaner, more healthier environment, knowing that they've got assistance of all sorts and independence. So it's a combination. But the point I'm trying to make is that you can't get this into their head. They're not interested in going there. It's just a psyche that I've got this and I want to stay here. I'm sure many kids now, when we were young, we wouldn't dream about putting our parents into a home assisted or anything like that. But because life is very different now, people are busy, both husband and wife are busy, kids are at school, the school runs, this, that, the other, just don't have that, time to accommodate and assisting. So that's where people like McCarthy and Stone and other operators like that provide those services. But the psyche of that person who's spent their life building that home, building that garden, putting the energy and time into it, is that I don't want to go. And they don't want to go into a box, to live into a box, but they'd rather go in a box out at home and good night God Vienna, basically. So that's the only box they're interested in. They're not interested in the 500 square foot box that they think they're going to live in after having lived in a 2,500, 3,000 square foot house.
Final story of the week. Chancellor Hunt has said that it's rumoured that he's written out a plan for a 99% mortgage scheme. So it looks like it's coming our way on March the 6th. It was first rumoured in January and could see prospective home buyers put down as little as 1% deposit on a property while the government backs the rest of the loan. I think we've seen these situations before, haven't we? Although industry experts have called for buyer support in the upcoming budget in the form of a relaunch of the Help to Buy scheme or a stamp duty discount, there are mixed views on the effectiveness of a 99% mortgage. First-time buyers, of course, have had a rough ride over the last few years, what with rapidly rising prices and inflation and interest rates and so forth. But is the 99% mortgage the solution that everybody wants? Because a lot of people are saying, well, actually, there's going to be an element of cost protection in the payments, so they're going to be more expensive, these 99% mortgages, so you're going to be paying more per month in the first place. But more importantly, Joe, with prices falling at the moment, is it not a real risk that they could be in negative equity very quickly?
Yeah, I'm not, under the current circumstances, I'm not really convinced that the 99, I think it's more of an election gimmick than it is actually a real gimmick. It would have been probably better to continue to do the Help to Buy which obviously is only good with new builds. So of course that will, have fueled the building part. Building costs have gone up so extortionate that the number of builders, unfortunately, that are finding it difficult to build or are going to the wall in terms of their companies, primarily is very, very high. They can't just afford to do it. Building costs are just astronomical. Most builders know. I mean, to give you an indication, there was a time only not even 10 years ago, we were looking to build properties at anything between 100 and 150 pound a square foot, 175 pound a square foot would have built you a very nice luxury house, and that was really top of the tree. Well, the average now is 250 pound a square foot. It's double the money, and maybe up to 300 pound a square foot, and that really is the killer in the building market. So I'm not sure that. So the only thing that can motivate that is obviously something like Help to Buy, where people will come in and builders have to put some money in, and the government has to put some money in, and of course the buyer has to put some money in. But it's no good for the second-hand market. And this 99% mortgage is good for both part of it. But the question is that how much deposit that people can have, and how high that rate's going to be in order to get the 99% mortgage. And is it still worth for any buyers to say, well, actually, I'm better off renting for a while because there's no way I can afford the mortgage payments. Then, of course, there's always the indemnity insurance that they'll have to charge up front. So anything over a certain percentage, the lender will have to secure by charging a policy. So whilst on the real front page, the 99% could look attractive, by the time you've actually added the cost of stamp duty, the indemnity policies, and all the other bits and maybe even some cases some sort of arrangement fees, you actually end up not with a 99% mortgage. You're probably theoretically ending up with a 95 or perhaps even lesser mortgage at a higher rate, but it sort of conjures up that image of you're getting a good deal. It's the old adage, isn't it? 190 now sounds cheaper than £2 and a penny.
Peter Stimpson, who is head of product at Empowered Mortgages, said this last week that he called the idea an irresponsible attempt to grab headlines rather than create solutions, and is indicative of a government that's run out of ideas. He added a 99% mortgage is, in essence, a 100% mortgage. The 1% deposit hardly contributes to preventing losses, and this will be reflected in the rates, which in all probability will sit above 6%. And there's the rub, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's really a gimmick of going to a store and saying, look, this is down to 99p or £1.99. It's really £2 and a penny. We just shaved it because you the customer thinks that you're getting a bargain at £1.99, and that's exactly what I think is happening here. It's a 99% mortgage, but really it's not been thought through. So buyers, I would recommend that you take good advice from financial advisors. Look at all the numbers before you actually commit to it. But let's see what they do. They will bring all these gimmicks in, and I think honestly, most of it's a bit too late.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how rates above 6% in terms of a mortgage payment on that deal, how that would look compared to, say, an equivalent rental payment. So at the end of the day, because if you're managing to pay your rent every month, then that's you should be able to cope with the mortgage payment, assuming that it would be lower.
Well, that's the idea, isn't it? But it doesn't work like that, because when they go to borrow money as a mortgage, the mortgage lender is doing all sorts of stress tests in order to make sure that if it's okay for 12 months, you might be okay to pay your rent. But what happens over the next 25 years or 24 years of the balance of your mortgage? Are you going to be able to do that? So they look at the stress test over, I think, 5 years to see if you can actually sustain that. Well, if you're at an age of 50 plus, your stress test is going to be even more stressier because your age is against you now. And so they're going to say, well, actually, you might even not be here in 5 years' time, let alone pay a mortgage of 20 years' time. So there's all sorts of scenarios that probably will take into consideration. But yeah, an extremely challenging time, and let's see what the Chancellor has to say.
Indeed, we will, and that'll be just ahead of next week's programme, because it'll be just after next week's programme, won't it? Because it's the 6th of March is the budget day. Okay, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you so much for watching Property Matters. Hope that was helpful and indeed interesting. See you again for another Property Matters very soon.